And now I'm very excited to welcome Paolo Bacigalupi celebrating the release of his novel Navola. Paolo Bacigalupi is an internationally best-selling author of speculative fiction. His debut novel, The Windup Girl, won the Hugo, Nebula, Locus, and John W. Campbell Awards, among others, and it was named on the Time magazine list of the 10 best novels of 2009. He is also the author of New York Times bestseller The Water Knife, and the young adult novel Shipbreaker, which was a Michael L. Prince Award winner and a finalist for the National Book Award as well. Paolo Bacigalupi's short fiction has been anthologized in various years' best collections of short science fiction and fantasy, has been nominated for 3 Nebula Awards, 4 Hugo Awards, and won the Theodore Sturgeon Memorial Award for Best Science Fiction Short Story of the Year. His newest novel has been lauded as a stunning feat of world building and as a mesmerizing portrait of the indomitable power of the human will. And so without any further ado, we are so grateful for this opportunity to host this wonderful author today and to share in the celebration of his new novel. So please join me in welcoming Paolo Bacigalupi to Politics and Prose.
Hey everybody, thanks for coming out. I'm gonna unload all of my various things here. It's really good to see you. I really appreciate you guys. So it's been a minute since I've been out. It's been a minute since I've written anything. And it's been a minute since I actually completed a novel. And the reason was that, as some of you probably know, I spent a lot of time writing about the environment. I spent a lot of time writing climate fiction. And what I found was that there was sort of this toxic thing where if your daily life is full of anxieties and then your creative life is full of extrapolating on those anxieties and actually making them even more real and more sort of exaggerated by creating fictional futures about them, that there's sort of this toxic synergy that sort of happens. And it meant that I just crashed out. I absolutely burned out. And it took me a while to dig out of the hole. And so for a while, I actually thought that I probably wasn't going to be writing anymore. I was starting to think about those other jobs that I could do. I was like, oh, I could be a solar installer. I could I always liked counseling. I liked helping people. Maybe I'd do that. But I decided I would try to come back and see whether or not I could find anything that I liked about writing anymore. And so I started this exercise where I would write about 500 words a day. And it didn't matter what it was. It didn't matter if it was any good. It didn't matter if it would go anywhere. It was just 500 words and then walk away. Sometimes if something was interesting, it might go a little longer, but there wasn't any need to go any further than 500 words. So if I was writing 500 words of something that was completely incoherent, done, walk away, toss it, that's fine. And over time, I wrote all sorts of stuff. I was writing some science fiction stuff. I wrote some fantasy stuff. I wrote some very trashy sword and sorcery erotica. But the whole thing was just to give yourself permission to not think about that this is going to go out and get published, or, oh, this has to be coherent, or, oh, the plot needs to be escalating, or, whatever the thing was that was in the back of your head. And one of the things that I ended up working on was this fantasy idea, and it started with a single sentence, and it ended up becoming something that kind of grew, and it grew very organically, and it became the thing that I kind of returned to again and again. And so I'm going to read from the very beginning of the book, because those early sentences, in fact, have survived pretty much intact all the way through this whole process. Initially, all of this was just a secret project. It was never meant to be published. And so it's sort of interesting now to be reading it out loud to people. But let's see if I can do this here. My father kept a dragon eye on his desk. An orb larger than a man's skull, gone milky and crystalline, but still burning with inner fire as if it retained life. He kept it on his desk next to the quills where he signed parchment debts and took trading signatories on linen and raw iron and narrow resin and cardamom and silk and horses. He kept it on the desk where he made loans for shipbuilding and war. The dragon eye sat beside a sag dagger and the Calorino's golden sigil of high office. Trading codexes lined my father's library, the records of all the promises that he kept in far-off lands. He liked to say that he traded in goods, but more in promises, and he never failed to collect. This was how he came to own the Sagman's dagger and the Calorino's sigil, the collecting of promises. But the dragon eye he had purchased from far-off Zaroom. Of the dragon eye's authenticity, there could be no doubt. It was not round as one might think. It retained tendrils of draconic nerves, crystallized, fine shards, sharp as daggers, that trailed from behind the eye so that it was less an orb than a teardrop. The sharp, trailing nerves made it appear as if it was the burning comet immortalized in Aragnalo's sketches upon the ceiling of the Calendra's Rotunda, seen in skies from Lucicia to Pagnanopole, and now fallen to our human earth. The eye seemed to glow with the very fury of the heavens, a vitality that could not be extinguished, even by death. When I was a small child, I would play in my father's library with my hound, and sometimes I would see it out of the corner of my eye, a fossil that was not bone, a jewel that was not stone. I called my hound Lazy, for she only roused herself to play with me, and never for any other. When I was close, her tail would wag, and she would seek me out, and then we would run through the galleries of my family's palazzo, up and down the wide halls, through the courtyards and porticos and gardens, up and down the wide staircases of the living quarters, and round the tight, spiral defenses of our tower. Our shouts and barks echoed across cobbles and parquet, bounced amongst the faces of my ancestors depicted in their portraits, and filled the frescoed rooms with their high painted ceilings where the bull of the Reguli always paced. We, too, had the run of the palazzo, and took it for granted as only the young and innocent can. But when we were in my father's library, for reasons that neither of us understood but somehow felt necessary, we, too, were as silent as thieves stealing in Quartiere Sangro. The dragon demanded reverence, even from children and lanky-legged puppies. While the authenticity of the eye was impossible to assail, its pedigree was less so. The trader my father bought it from claimed it came from a worm that had terrorized the sands and red cliffs of Zaroom for more than a century before finally being slain by a great warrior with a blade cast of diamond. The eye thence was offered, of course, to a rapacious sultan to forestall a terrible war and to rescue a princess. There was more to the story. The luminous beauty of the maiden imprisoned by the sultan, the lasciviousness and debauch of that cruel ruler, the nefarious sorceries the sultan cast to trick the warrior, the triumphant breaking of the maiden's chains, and the final tragic betrayal of the warrior. The fall of empires, the drifting of time and sand, the collapse of ancient cities into legend. What could be verified was that the eye had been excavated from the crypt of a powerful ruler, with a touch of slipspeak as to whether this constituted scholarly discovery or outright looting. But in any case, a turn of events that led to the eye falling into the merchant's caravan and traveling the trade routes over the icy Kim and Karet passes and thence traversing the white-capped waves of Oceania Cerulia to our own fine city of Navola, the beating heart of Banca Mercanta for all the lands that spoke Amo's dialects. And finally, to my father, Devanacci di Reguli, famous for his wealth and influence throughout the lands that touched La Cerulio's azure waters. Whatever the merchant's claims about the eye's origins, my father maintained that the dragon's death had not come from a hero's sword, but most likely old age. If a sword had ever pierced the great beast's scales, it had occurred in post-mortem butchery, not heroic battle. Dragons did not submit to the likes of human blades, not even diamond ones. But he bought the eye anyway, paying without bargaining and assuring the merchant's name for 100 years with the price, and he set the artifact upon his desk. When men came to sign contracts and make promises, he would make them swear upon the eye of a dragon. In this way, business partners were adequately warned that they dealt not with some mere notary silver and quadrato magi, but with Divinacci di Regula de Navola, and nothing would protect them when he sought a return on his promises. My father had a dragon eye. That long-dead Sultan of Zaroum did not have one. The king of far-off Sharu did not have one. Our own Calarino of Navola did not have one. In fact, no one could say they had one. Perhaps a scale of a dragon. Or sometimes, maybe, a fossil thing a man might claim was a tooth, but this terrifying crystallized memory of power, this was something different indeed. The cat's eye iris still held its orange color, even though the surface had gone milky. It glowed with an inner light that even death had not extinguished. Whenever I was in my father's library, the dragon eye always seemed to watch me. It seemed to track me each time I entered there, hungry. It frightened me. But, if I'm honest before Amo, it drew me as well. When my father wasn't present, away on one of his journeys to meet with the promissories of our far-flung empire of trade, I would sometimes sneak into his library and stare at it, the milky sheen of the surface, the trapped, flaming rage within its winking cat-slit eye. An eye as large as my whole head, staring with fury at our quotidian human endeavors, our buying and selling of bales of champa wool and sacks of wheat. It frightened me, and it drew me. And one day, I touched it. All right. So from that beginning, I just kept going, and it was always, this sort of 500 words a day. And because I wasn't thinking I was ever going to publish this, I followed the story wherever it went, and any door that seemed to appeal, I would walk through it. And so I ended up building a whole mythos. I ended up building whole pantheons of gods. I ended up building philosophies, and all sorts of ephemera now are scattered throughout the book. You'll see quotes from emperors, or you'll see poems, or you'll see little comments and travel logs from travelers who've passed through the lands. And anything that was entertaining to me, I would play with it, and explore it and expand on it. And the book sort of grew and grew and grew and grew. The story grew and grew and grew until there was this point where I had probably, 200,000 words worth of material, and it's just this immense thing. And there was this moment where I was like, it seems like maybe I've written a book by accident. And so there was so much of it that I knew it wouldn't even fit in a single book. So I found a spot in the story where I could close it out and cut it and say, this section is book-like. And I went back and I polished it and I gave it to my agent. And because my agent does what he does, he sold it very, very quickly. And suddenly I was back in the game. And anyway, the thing, though, about it was that I was always following these people who I was interested in. And from that beginning, you have this man who owns this dragon eye, Divinacci di Regula. And I was like, oh, okay, who's this guy? What's he up to? And then we have his son, Davico di Regula, sort of gazing up at this powerful man. And then we have the dragon eye. And Divinacci, as it turns out, is an incredibly powerful person. He lives in the city of Navola, the city-state of Navola, which is very wealthy. It's a merchant banking sort of city-state, and he's the most powerful of all. He's the lender of choice when you want to go to war with somebody, raise an army, build a new castle for your mistress, whatever the thing might be. And he's shrewd. He's shrewd and he's manipulative. He sits behind the politics of the place and manipulates it through all of the promises and all of the loyalties that he's generated. And there's good reason for him to be shrewd, and there's reason for his family to be alert and always trying to manipulate the politics, because the politics of Navola are very dangerous. All of the city is spiked with defensive towers for the various archinomi. The great names of the city all have defensive towers scattered throughout the city where they can sort of run to whenever there's wars between the names. And in fact, these wars are sort of so legendary that even that they refer back to them and they remember them. And in fact, when the bodies start piling up in the streets, the children start making up rhymes about them. And so I'm going to read you a children's rhyme about the times when there's the wars between the names. And this children's rhyme is called The Dogs Get Fat. And because I was going down through so many rabbit holes while I was creating this story, one of the other things I did was I started creating a dialect. So there's an offshoot dialect that I ended up creating called Navolese. And so I'm going to read this. Actually, I wrote this originally in Navolese. And so I'm going to read it in Navolese to you, my made-up language. And then I'm going to read the English translation, or the loosely translated extraction from it. So anyway, so this is The Dogs Get Fat, or Cani Ingressano. Cani ingressano, patri, matri, tuoto stelletano, nera la notte, rosa la strada, fratri, fili, sono garetano, amici, cugini, perché no, vino d'insetti, sangue viscoso, cani ingressano. And the translation, the dogs get fat. The dogs get fat, the dogs get fat. Father, mother, stabbed with knives, black the night, red the street. Siblings and offspring, strangled with wire. Friends and cousins, too, why not? Wine of insects, sticky blood. The dogs get fat, the dogs get fat. So yeah, like it's rabbit holes. Like everything was rabbit holes in me for this. And as I started to build this language and this culture of Navola and what the Navolese people are like, I started building an entire set of terms that they typically use that kind of reflected the kind of culture that they live in. And so because they're a trading culture and because they negotiate a lot, they have customs around their trading and negotiating. And so they'll sit parlo banco, they'll sit across the plank from one another when they negotiate. And there's always a requirement that when you sit down across the plank from each other, there should be wood between you, there should be sweet tea, and there should be bitter cheese. And you should share that food, and then you should negotiate. And, in a pinch, you can have a fallen log or a tree stump or something between you, but it has to be a piece of wood between you. You can trade some water back and forth, but there has to be this ritual of trade going on before you sit down and you face off against your opponent in negotiation. Now, when you're negotiating, of course, like you don't want to, let your opponent know what you want or what your best price is or anything else. And so the Navolese have a term for that that's called faccio scuro, a face that can't be read. And so people who are masters of faccio scuro are very much respected and sort of celebrated. And so that's sort of the poker face of Navolese people. So somebody who's faccio scuro is, very cool. Devanacci de Reguli, the head of the Reguli family, he is an absolute maestro of faccio scuro. Davico, his son, is a much kinder person. He's a sweeter soul. He's very open. He's more naive. He's faccio chiaro. That's not such a good thing in Navola. And that's sort of the crux of the story is really Davico faces the problem of needing to take the reins of power from his father eventually when his nature and his personality are not well suited for the role that's demanded of him. And that absolutely matters because it is a dangerous place. So I'm going to read, and there's some other words that I wanted to talk about in Navolese, though. One of them is, the other one that really matters is a concept called sfacire, which is to mark the face. And so Navolese custom has it that when somebody pays somebody obeisance, you get down on the ground on your knees and you press your cheek to somebody's boot. You mud your cheek, you mark the cheek, and that's called sfacire. So to force sfaccio on somebody or to force sfacire on somebody is to take ownership over them and to control them and to be able to manipulate them. And so Devanacci has many people who owe him favors. He's marked many people's cheeks. Anyway, this is all very troubling to Davico because he doesn't really understand how to deal with the problems of the role he's supposed to assume. And so I'm going to read a short section from when Davico has grown up a little bit, and he's having a conversation with his family's numerati, and the numerati are the bookkeepers of their bank, of Banca Reguli. And so this numerati is named Merio, and Davico's just after Devanacci has pulled off a particular coup. Davico is both impressed and troubled because he doesn't know how to match him. And so I'm going to read a little bit from this with Davico and Merio talking. How can I match him? I asked Merio later when I was studying with him in the scriptorium. He thinks and plans all the time. He plans in his sleep even. He plays cartolegge blind and always beats me. Always he has another plan or plot. He's never trapped or wrong. Merio laughed. But that is why we make you study, Davico. He ruffled my hair. Do not think you attain mastery overnight. It's a long and arduous process. Your father practiced long to become the man he is. In time, you'll match him. Nay, I shook my head. I am not the same. He is something else entirely, as if Legos and Scuro had a child, all business and twisty thinking. Merio laughed again. Spy, you are Navolese. It's your birthright to understand the twisted path. He added more seriously. There's no escaping the work, though. If you wish your mind to be flexible and agile, you must practice with it. So, on with our study. Why is the gold of Cheru something we reject? What about you? Should your mind not also be flexible and agile? Me? Merio laughed. I'm from Pardi. He patted his soft belly. Men of Pardi eat well, but we do not plot or plan. It's enough to see our pigs fatten, and see our white-horned cows fill their udders with good milk, and see our cheeses age. We are farmers. Our great trait is that we trust. He considered a moment. Also, we're optimistic. A farmer must be, after all. We trust the sun to shine and the rains to fall. We trust our wives to come back to our beds at night, even when we drink wine all day. We trust the sun to shine and the... Oh, whoopsie. We trust our wives to come back to our beds at night, even when we drink wine all day. This is what a man from Pardi is good for. We are good for trust. We are good for drink. We're very good at table. We're not so good in bed, but we're very good at table. You're not a farmer, though, and you don't have a wife. He waggled his thick eyebrows. But I do set a very good table. You know what I mean. Well, Pardi men are also good for keeping numbers in their columns. We're trustworthy for that. Now you're just making things up. Not at all. My father was a farmer, but I was the sixth son, so, he shrugged, a numerati was willing to take me apprentice, and he was my father's neighbor, so a numerati is what my father made me. He ruffled my hair and pinched my ear. But a numerati, too, is not a job for you twisted-minded Navolese. Too clever by half, the Navolese. He pinched my ears again. Twisty, twisty, twisty. Not to be trusted with numbers in their columns. Next thing you know, the Navolese has stolen your business, your wife, your daughters, probably your pantaloni as well. I pushed his hand away before he could pinch again. I think I should have been born from Pardi, I said. I'm not twisty at all. Spy, he said, turning serious. You are de Reguli, and you are da Navola. The twisted paths are your home and your safest thicket. Your mind is as sharp as Cazzetta's hidden daggers. It is your birthright, make no mistake. Your mind must be as sharp as a blade, as subtle as a fish beneath the waves, and as agile as the fox, for that is what a Navolese is. It is your nature. You were nursed by Scuro himself, and no mistake. This is your birthright. So I ended up building an entire world with all of these characters, and so alongside Merio, there's Aga Khan, the captain of the honorable captain of the guard. There's There's cazzetta, a stillettatore. The stillettatore are the daggermen, the assassins of the various arcanomi, and so every arcanomo always has a stillettatore. That sort of says something about Navolese culture as well. And there's one other character I want to read about, and this is Davico's sister, Celia. And she has been adopted into his family. And I think I have time to do this. She's been adopted into his family and under fairly fraught circumstances. And so this passage is from a little bit after they've been growing up together for a little while. Come and ride with me, Davico. Celia slapped her riding gloves upon my desk. She was dressed in gray riding skirt and breeches and had a flush on her cheeks. Her dark eyes sparkled mischievously. I'm bored. The sun is shining. I'd known of her arrival in the bank by the stir she caused below, that familiar ripple of excitement and awe that came from the abacassi and numerari as they greeted and fawned over her. Her voice filtered up the stairs, sparkling and breezy, teasing and joking with the scribes, all of them ensnared in their labors of gold counting and ledger marking, or else they would have surely followed her up like dogs starved for treats. As soon as I heard her entrance, I knew I would find myself in difficulty. Celia was quicker of action and quicker of wit, and as the years had passed, she had become more than simply my sister. She was my friend, if a disruptive one. I know you heard me, Celia said, slapping her gloves again. Come and ride. I'm busy, I said, trying to remember the next words I'd been about to write. In truth, I desperately wished to escape with Ernest, and the idea of a ride appealed, to escape not only the scriptorium, but also the walls of Navola. But my duties beckoned, and I was determined not to disappoint either Mario or my father. It's a lovely day. It's a lovely spring day. Why waste it indoors? He's sharpening his brains, Mario called out from his own desk, where he sat upon a dais above the rest of us, his face smudged with ink. As you should be doing also, young Sia. Celia made a face at him. My brains are as sharp as the knife that split Arula's hair, thank you very much. She leaned over me, examining my ledgers. What are these lists of yours? I scanned the column. Silk, horses, gold from Cheru. That's weak gold. And rain is wet. Thank you for your insight. So I must convert the value to Navisoli, and Andreton in Cheru keeps making his coins less pure, so it's impossible to make a good conversion. Well, she said as she circumnavigated Tullio, making him fight to keep his eyes from her pretty swaying form, I'm going for a ride, and Aga Khan is coming as well. She nodded at Lazy, who lay at my feet. And Lazy wants to run, doesn't she? Doesn't she, my sweetheart? Lazy's ears pricked up with understanding, and her tail banged against the marble. I half expected her to leap up at Celia's beckoning, but, in the critical moment, she held her ground. Still, she looked up at me with despair, brown eyes pleading, her opinion of her choices clear. Do you know why we do not lend to Shipians, I asked, ignoring Lady's pleading. Because you don't like how they cut their mustaches, Celia hazarded as she toyed with Antono's inkwell. His cheeks flushed a bright and uncomfortable pink. Because they're too short. Because they're like lice in a whorehouse. Once they get in, they never want to leave. Antono blushed even more furiously. Because they never pay back, I said. They take your loan, and then they flee back to Scipia, and the next time they come to Navola, they send another of their family and act as if they do not know one another. The Borghese lost a fortune that way, trusting Scipians. Well, that and their schmo simply refused to pay Baraga. Their schmo, Celia winked at Antono. They have a leader called a schmo, Antono. Would you lend to a schmo? Antono stuttered something, his skin nearly purple. He was having so much trouble breathing. Celia gave up tormenting him and returned to me and Lazy, crouching down to scratch Lazy's ears. And why do we care about schmoes and Scipians? Because Mario has asked me to come up with a way to ensure against non-payment from Scipians. Imagine that, a way to secure against someone who will always rob you. Don't lend to them, Celia suggested. Not acceptable, Mario interjected from his own desk. We want them to support us if Cheru should come calling again. Cheru fears them at their back after the battle on the peninsula. And so Davico sits, tangled inside his father's clever nets, with yellowing ledgers and 3 abacuses, living in these moldery shadows while poor Lazy languishes. Celia scratched more vigorously behind Lazy's ears and under her chin. Poor Lady Lazy. I have a place here beside me for the young Sia if she's not careful, Merio warned. Celia laughed, unfazed. Terzi abacassi sensigati mensi. 3 abacuses, but no brains. Or, more specifically, missing the minds of cats, sensigati mensi. A story from our childhood. Merio gave her a baleful look, but she only winked at me and said it again. Terzi abacazzi sensigati mensi. I heard you the first time, I said. She began to hum the tune and then to sing. Once there was a man who thought he would make himself rich. He was a master of numbers, a master of ink and things that do not exist. With his abacuses, he could make money appear in ledger books. And people believed, oh, they believed. But his 3 cats played the abacus as well, and they played as cats with mice. So mice appeared and squeaked and ran and ate and danced. I'm not the 3 abacuses nor the 3 cats, I interrupted. I have serious work to do. Aye, maestro, not 3 cats. Oh, so. She went and took a chair from Tullio and pulled it up beside my desk, plopped into it, laced her hands upon the wood, and rested her chin upon her hands, playing at solemnity. What other task makes our young bull believe he must ruin this spring day? Well, I also have to write a letter to our capo di banco in Torreamo and invite him to make the journey north for my name day. I'm supposed to flatter him and make him feel as if I am a man and that he can respect when my father steps down one day. But his cheek is already marked by your father. Why flatter? Because Merio says, friendship is as powerful as pay and pledges, Merio wagged a finger, and sometimes more, Sia. The words a man speaks when he marks his cheek are but the dry desert winds of Zarum if they are not wet with the blood of his heart. Sia Nevada says that a word any man speaks is nothing but dry wind regardless, Celia says. Dry wind at best. The wind of his buttocks, most likely. Spy, Cialina! You are too young to see the world so darkly. This man, Filippo, I went on, apparently appreciates jokes about whores and priests. He collects and trades them. And goats, Merio added. Don't forget that he especially loves the goats. And goats. A charming man, then, Celia considered. So tell him a story about our canon priest, Garagazzo. Something about a fat man of religion who makes his nuns scour the folds of his belly with their tongues. Huh, a good blasphemy, then. Not at all. All the nuns speak of it. His folds stink like Scroto's baths, they say. I'm sure you could add something about goats as well, and it would not be untrue. Celia returned her attention to fawning over Lazy. It's a crime that Davico named you lazy, she said, scratching vigorously and cooing. Such a terrible slander of such a good girl. Such a good girl who just wants to run outside and play instead of being stuck in here in the shadows with the ledgers and the ink. Lazy's tail thumped all the harder. She gazed even more desperately up at me. She doesn't do that for anyone else, you know. Not even that tail wag. If you didn't hold her in your thrall, she'd be mine in an instant, Celia said, still scratching. She's a good girl, and she senses my pure heart. She senses that you feed her 12-month-aged Montolo ham under the table. More slander, Celia cooed, scratching Lazy's ears even more vigorously. I will defend your honor, dearest Lazy. And with that, she leapt up and seized the quill from my hand before I could stop her. She danced back, quick and laughing. I lunged after her. Come out with me, Davico. Come out with Lady Lazy. Gold will lose its value. Cities will fall. Shipians will steal from you in the morning. We will all be dust draped over your father's dragon eye. And tomorrow, Charu will mint more of those Fescatolo coins, and you'll have to do all the numbers again, while your capo in Torreamo dreams sweet dreams of goats. Lazy panted up at me, her gaze pitiful and begging, her tail wagging so hard that her hindquarters shook to and fro. You don't fight fair, I groused to Celia. I was trained by the Reguli, Celia replied cheerfully, saluting me with the quill. Come, ride. The light is bright, the air is soft, and the apricots are blooming. All right. So that's at least a taste of Navola. There is a lot more, actually. It's always hard for me to pick what to read or anything. But if anybody has any questions for me about the book, about other books that I've written, about writing, anything like that, I'd be happy to answer them. I understand they want you to use the mic because I think they're recording me over there on that camera. But yeah, if anybody has any questions, please come on up. I'd love to answer any questions you have.
Hey, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
So, with your works, your world building is always marvelous, but at its core, you have a wonderful sense of whatever the economics is that drives it. Where does that come from for you? Where did you get that sort of feel for, whether it be traders in a city-state or the world which trades in calories as currency or whichever. Right. Where do you get that?
Yeah, I probably Mr. Montiel at Oberlin. I don't know. Like I think there are a few Obies in the audience actually. I had an econ professor. I only ever took intro econ, but it really made an impression on me actually. And it sort of like shifted kind of the way that I looked at the world. I mean, yeah, there's always been something there where you're kind of looking at what the mechanisms are that underlie a society, and that might be its geography, that might be its natural resources, it might be these other things as well, the landscapes that surround people and how that informs their culture and stuff, and then also their economics. Yeah, it all sort of connects up to me. And yeah, I don't know, like it's one of those things you kind of almost do reflexively. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
I mean, it's okay if nobody wants to just run for it here. It's okay. No, line up. Absolutely. Great. Awesome. Thanks. Fantastic.
Hi, I went to Oberlin a bit later than you. I have a very Oberlin-specific question. Did you know a guy named Jason Molina?
That name rings a bell, but we didn't hang out. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, I feel a bit awkward asking this, but I remember seeing when William Gibson was here, he was talking about how he was writing sort of near future stuff with agency. He was here for that.
Right.
And he was talking about how difficult it was to try to write when events seem to be running up against you.
Right, sure. And
I had no idea why you have taken so long between novels, but that really hit me. So my girlfriend had been around the southwest of the States. We went there, and she was shocked by how things have moved in a negative direction.
Right.
And I was wondering if, like, the way that the world sort of pushing past, well, clearly with the Water Knife, you had a lot of things in your mind. And I remember I think it was Terry Gross that interviewed you, and you were saying you were trying to project into the future.
Right.
Does it feel as though things have just pushed past where you were going, or like?
I mean, yeah. So do things feel like they pushed past where I was going when I'm writing science fiction? I guess there's two things that are kind of going on for me at least. So one of them is like, especially with something like The Water Knife. When The Water Knife came out, it was really odd because that was when Obama was still president. We were just joining the Paris Climate Accords. There was this moment where I actually felt like the book was maybe irrelevant even before it came out. You're writing this warning about climate, trying to make people understand that there are real consequences and real threats in terms of like how an ecosystem unravels and how that underlies our prosperity. And I was like, oh, it looks like we're actually becoming a rational society, and we're going to try to solve some problems, and that's pretty powerful. And so I was like, oh, maybe I've wasted my time, and maybe I'm irrelevant. And then, of course, a year later, Trump gets elected, and it's like, oh, I think we're going to just go actually in this other direction. So now The Water Knife feels more relevant than ever, and that was interesting because in some ways, like events have only proved out for me in that sense.
The Mary Perrys seem
right, yeah, you have these fundamentalists praying for water or whatever, and it's like, oh, right, this is this complete untethering from reality, and it seems like that seems to be an American pastime now. So that part of it actually, like in some ways, it feels like you've nailed it, and you're really sorry to have nailed it. And so in that sense, I actually feel like I was anticipating, and I was sadly fairly accurate about thinking about that we're gonna choose the stupider paths rather than the more rational ones. But there is this other quality, definitely, where what I found was that there was a point when I was sort of falling deeper and deeper into the hole, that I was like writing these futures and stuff. And what I found was that I was echoing the anxieties of the moment. I wasn't extrapolating forward far enough, and I wasn't adding to the conversation anymore. It was just merely sort of reverberating the same things that suddenly everybody was extrapolating about what the worst case scenarios might be. And you were just sort of in that mix with everybody. And I was like, oh, I'm not adding to this conversation. There's no recontextualization that you're providing. There's no greater comprehension that you're providing. There's no illumination that you're providing. You're just more of the noise. And so in that sense, yeah, I definitely feel like things kind of caught up to me and
Sorry, if I can ask another one.
Yeah.
So has this book proven to be a salve? Like you found a route or an avenue of talking where you could heal a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. It's been a complete salve on me. Like, yeah, no, it's been a healing thing all the way through. It was play. It was creative play. Nice. There's some things about it that are like extraordinarily relaxing, because there's an entire, outside of the city of Navola, there's this area called the Romelia, this great wilderness outside there, and they call it the wild Romelia, and there's sort of the low Romelia, and then there's the deep Romelia. And these are these huge craggy peaks with these, glorious waterfalls and like tight little valleys, and this is a place where shadow cats and stone bears and mist wolves live, and where it's said that fatas, these sort of sylvan nymph creatures, like come out of like dryads, things like that. They come out of the wood or the water or the stone, and there's a whole mythical place out there. But it's especially and there's these things called whitebark, these trees that are just these incredibly tall trees that are their bark is white, their leaves are green, and during the summer, but then in the fall their bark turns red and their leaves turn gold, and there's this entire world out there, and it's wild, and nature still has a dominant place in this world. It is not under siege. Human beings are not just chewing it up. It's actually there's a space where human beings actually are the small things in it still, and so stuff like that feels incredibly soothing to imagine. A wild world out there. And there's another mountain range called the Cielo Frigo, and in the Cielo Frigo, the glaciers never melt. And you almost feel sinful writing that. Like, are you allowed to even imagine that idea anymore? Like, the glaciers, they're just unchanging. It stays icy and cold in the great tops of the peaks and stuff like that. And that's very soothing. It feels very much like an escape and it's a very relaxing thing. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for finishing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I loved writing it.
Oh, yeah. I squeeze one more quick thing in.
Yeah.
Is the fluted girl in any way related to what happened, to the wind-up girl?
Is the fluted girl in any way related to the wind-up girl? No, those are completely separate worlds. Yeah. Sorry. Hey, Fran.
Hey, Paolo. Congratulations on making it through an interconnected series of very complicated tubes this day.
Yeah, no, it was actually, I feel very successful flying through all of the software mayhem. So yeah, it's like this event almost not brought to you by Microsoft and CrowdStrike.
What? Yes. So I love a good Q&A, and that I love this book. And the characters in particular are fantastic. I wanted to know.
One writer to another.
As your friend, yes.
Right.
Now, I wanted to know, what was your favorite secondary character to write? Who was the most fun?
Oh, who's my favorite secondary character?
This is like, who's your favorite Beatle, but in your own book.
It's like, and it's also who's your favorite child.
Right?
Like, you feel like you're insulting all the other ones when you do this. I really did love a lot of these people in their own rights and for very different reasons. But there were probably two that were more when they came on the page. Oh no, wait, there's 3. See, that's the thing. Like,
Okay, you could say 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's the people I really loved writing. In addition, like every time Celia's on the page, actually, she's hilarious, and she's always got like this sort of verve and wit that I really have enjoyed. Especially because Davico is such a sincere sort of kid. They just cross really funny in really funny ways. But there's another Archinomo. There's another great name in the city, and it's Lady Furia. And so La Siana Nicizia Furia is this other Archinomo, and her family has made her. They've made their fortunes in the misery trade, which is slaves, and they traffic in people. And she is terrifying. And she likes being terrifying. And so when she came on the page, there's a moment very early in the story when Davico and Celia and their entourage of guards encounters Siana Furia's entourage of guards. And there's this moment where they meet in a very tight alley, all on horseback. And suddenly things get very, very tense. And Furia loves it. She loves how frightened everybody is of her coming through, and she sort of feeds on it. And as soon as I started writing her, and she just came out of nowhere. Like I was just like, "Who is this crazy lady? She is awesome." And so she sort of she delights in frightening other people, and the way she goes about it, and she delights in sort of creating her own kinds of mayhem. And so there are dinner scenes where she's sitting with people and just. She's just the worst, best dinner companion ever. And so I really loved writing her. But then Cazzetta the Stilettatore, I really like him because he's so cynical. He just kills people and doesn't look back. And I really liked him. And then I like all the ones who like the mayhem. Like the ones who I think there's something like this, like it's like your id getting to like get loose on the page kind of. And then the other one I really liked was Filippo, the capo from Torriamo, the other banking, he's Filippo Di Basti, and he's the capo of Torriamo banking for the Reguli family, and he is filthy. And so he's just, anytime he's on the page, it's like another goat joke, and I like writing goat jokes. It was funny. It made me laugh. So yeah, those ones.
So that was 4.
Oh my gosh! See, there you go. See, I can't stop because I'll keep going. Yeah. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hopefully, a quick one for you. The ongoing argument in any room full of writers is plotters versus pantsers. People who carefully plot their stories versus the ones that are kind of just going by the seat of their pants and hopefully I'll get somewhere by the end of it.
Right.
I have the sense of you in your prior works, I don't know you at all as a writer, as much more of a plotter. Is that a fair? Is that yes? No.
No.
No. Oh, you're a pantser.
I don't think I don't quite. I feel like those. I feel like those terms are restrictive in certain ways. What I've found is that the thing that works best for me is that oftentimes in the early stages of a book, it really helps for me to churn. And so I'll write many scenes early on that aren't necessarily meant to get anywhere. They're just meant to help me understand and build the world. This sort of happened very specifically when I was writing The Drowned Cities, which is a sequel to Shipbreaker. And the backstory is that when I wrote Shipbreaker, I actually did simply pants the plot. Like I knew there was some general, I knew there was, first act, second act, third act. I knew that there was this kid who needed to figure out a way to get out of his shipbreaking life and out onto the amazing sailing ships. Didn't know anything else, just kept going. And I wrote it in about 6 weeks. It was like a channeled book. Like, the muse came, this book channeled its way out, and I thought I'd figured out how to write all novels for all time. And I thought I was a genius. And then I wrote The Drowned Cities. And the first thing I did was I forced myself to keep going and keep going and keep going the same way I had with Shipbreaker. And I wrote an entire 80,000 word draft of a book, or maybe even 100,000. And And it was terrible. And it was so terrible that I gave it to my editor, and she said, "Wow, this would be a really good book if you actually explored any of the 6 themes that you introduced in it." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, this is terrible. You're right." So then I threw it all away, and I started over. And what I ended up doing was I ended up working on the very beginning of the book for a very long time, I found a couple of characters that I liked, and I started writing about their lives. I started writing about different ways that I might meet them. I started writing different scenes, and each time those scenes didn't necessarily work very well, but there were elements that I would discover. And so I would discover an aspect of, there are these people called soldier boys, these child soldiers, and I would learn more about the culture of the soldier boys, or I would learn about this girl Malia, figure out, oh yeah, like what's her background? Oh, she's had her hand cut off. And this is only like after a couple of different scenes I've written. I'm like, oh, maybe she's actually lost a hand to the soldier boys already. Okay, let's write this scene again now, thinking about that. And I'd go back and kind of keep looping and looping until Malia and Mouse and the soldier boys all started feeling incredibly real. And there's this moment when you sort of feel like liftoff. And it's like a jet, like getting enough lift or whatever. You believe the world so much, and you believe the characters so much that they start to move autonomously and functionally, which does feel a little bit like pantsing, right? It's like, okay, I just follow my characters. But the thing is oftentimes in that front end of the book, and it might be about the first third, while you're reworking it, there's some moment where you're like, what's this story about? And you suddenly have this like moment where you're like, oh, that's where I'm going. And it's all the way at the end. And you can see it, and you can see that guide star out there. It's like, that's what the last scene is going to be. That's where this is all heading. And so you don't necessarily know how you're going to get to that, but you do have the guide star out there of the final destination that's going to help you make decisions along the way. And that's been the way that I've worked the most since then. And that's the one that kind of works the best for me, is become, really, really calm about being in the mud for a long time until you can kind of like pop, oh, that's where we're going. And certainly that happened with Navola, where I was going for a while, and then suddenly I was like, oh, that's the last sentence. That's the very last sentence of the entire story, and I could see it. So,
all right, thank you very much.
Yeah. Any other questions? Alrighty then. I will be signing books up here. You should buy all of them. Did I say that right?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, please buy all of them. Thank you, Paolo. That was amazing. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thanks for coming out, everyone. Thanks.